Meal, boy, wasn't that good? That was delicious. Before we get started tonight, I know y'all probably seen these come in your mail before and things. That little link that I posted on the Facebook page, they're associated with this, but they have a thing called School of Evangelism, and really like for y'all to check that out, and we can talk about it later. But just wanted to point that out to you before we begin. So tonight, I'm going to do a little bit of meddling. Yeah, Tommy's like, yeah, I'm going to meddle, Tommy. That's what we do. But I'm going to talk about voting. Now, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. You got to make that decision on your own. That's not my job, okay? But I do want us to consider our role as a Christian and a citizen of our country. And so we're going to look at a few things tonight to think about, and start off with, of course, one of the great philosophers of the world, Charlie Brown, and Linus. Linus says, there are three things I've learned to never discuss with people: religion, politics, and the great pumpkin. Now, obviously, I don't think most of us are going to have too much problem with the great pumpkin. Whether you believe in the great pumpkin or not, that's up to you. I've never seen him. And I generally get my treats through the old-fashioned way, beg door to door. So that's the way we do it. But when it comes to religion and politics, our culture generally says those are two things you shouldn't talk about. And unfortunately, the religion particularly, or Bible things, are something that we are Christians are required to talk about. And the idea of religion and politics together is that, as Mahatma Gandhi said, those who believe religion and politics aren't connected don't understand either. Now, I'm not saying that he had a clear understanding of religion, because obviously he did not, but nonetheless, he did understand that they are connected. And we saw this in our own country just a few years ago when government was telling congregations of the Lord's church, as well as other religious groups, you cannot meet. Matter of fact, in some places, if Christians were to have come together to meet, they could have been subject to jail and fines and all kinds of problems, right? And we saw that. And I don't know about y'all, but I never did figure there was a time in my life where our government would say, you as Christians can't come together. Now, I know they did it on account of, the pandemic and all of that. And I understand where they were coming from. But nonetheless, I don't know that the government has a right to tell us as Christians in our form of government that we can't meet together. And so they do connect together. Well, as citizens of this country, but also citizens of the kingdom of God, we do have dual citizenship. You'll notice that we do have an obligation to our country. Jesus talked about this in Matthew chapter 22, about the idea of render to Caesar that which is Caesar's. We have to pay our taxes. And I don't know about y'all, but sometimes I don't exactly agree with how our government spends our tax money. Do you? I mean, there are times when I look at some of the things that they spend it on. I mean, can you believe that that in some places they have spent tax money on studying how to do contraceptives for deer? Can you believe that? Contraceptives for deer, to control the deer population. Why don't you just allow more hunting? It's easier. But nonetheless, my tax dollars went to fund that ridiculous thing, among other ridiculous things, and I'm sure there are even more ridiculous things that my tax dollars go to fund. But Jesus says, I'm supposed to pay my taxes. We see the same thing in Romans chapter 13. The idea that as citizens, we are to obey the laws of the land. Same thing in 1 Peter chapter 2. As citizens, we are to obey the laws of the land. Even the laws that we don't necessarily agree with, as long as it doesn't prevent us from worshiping and serving our God. Like for instance, sometimes there are times when I don't necessarily agree with their speed limits. Do you? There are times when I think I should go faster. I do. And there are times when they put stop signs at, I think, some of the most random places. And I'm like, why do you put a stop sign here? I should be able to just yield and keep on moving. But it's a law. I've got to obey it. And so, yes, we do have dual citizenship. But by the same token, we live in a situation that many countries don't have. We have the opportunity as citizens of this country to participate in our government. Now, Paul participated in his Roman citizenship. You know, back in the first century, not everybody, not every Christian. As a matter of fact, I would say that probably if the makeup of the church was similar to the makeup of society at large, there was probably a good 60% of the church that did not have citizenship in the Roman Empire. Paul did. Paul was born a citizen. He didn't have to buy or purchase his citizenship. He was born a citizen. And so Paul talks about this very thing in Acts chapter 16. You know, he tells them, you know, I was born a citizen. I didn't have to pay for it. Paul had benefits as being a citizen. In Acts chapter 22, you'll find there that Paul, when he had been accused by the Jews, and then, you know, he appealed it on up, and he went to the governor, and he didn't get satisfaction from the governor, and he determined, well, you know what? As a Roman citizen, I can appeal this all the way up to Caesar. You know, that's kind of like us taking it to the Supreme Court of the United States. That's because back then, the Caesar was the Supreme Court. He was the final judge in that system. And so Paul did. He appealed all the way up to Caesar in Acts chapter 25. Well, in our country, we have a very wonderful situation. You know, just like our founding documents say, we the people of the United States of America, right? We the people. We don't have a king. We don't have a Caesar. We don't have rulers. You realize we have people that we send up to Washington to basically do what we want them to do. Now, does that mean they always do what we want them to do? No. Matter of fact, I'd say probably the majority of the time they really don't do what we want them to do, right? But we do actually have some say. For instance, if your representative and your senator are not doing what you want them to do, what can we do as citizens? Well, we can call them up and say, hey, I think you're doing a terrible job. You need to fix this. We actually have the right to call them up and leave messages for them, and hopefully they call us back. A lot of times they probably won't, but we can do it anyway. And we can tell everybody else, hey, everybody else call them. We can flood them with calls. And if we flood them with calls on a certain issue, guess what? A lot of times they will change their position on it because they know that if their people are not happy with them, what happens the next election? They don't get the votes and they're kicked out. You know, as they would say, you're fired, right? We can fire our representatives. We can fire our senators. Technically, we can even fire judges if they're really, really bad. You can impeach a judge and you can disbar a judge. It can happen. We can fire our elected executives. That would be governors and presidents and things like that. We can fire them. There is a process. Now, does it happen often? No. But the process is there. We can do it. Paul didn't have that. Matter of fact, I don't think that anybody in the first century had that. So you're not going to find that addressed in the Bible. Nonetheless, we do have the possibility of participating in our political system, which maybe not everyone in the first century did. Now, back in the 1860s, at the time of the Civil War, and just a little bit before that, there was a great division among the Christians at that day and time about what are we going to do. Particularly Christians in the South had a very difficult time with this because as Christians, we understand that every person is made in the image of God. Whether you're a slave or you're a free man, every person is made in the image of God. So if you had lived back at that day and time, you would have been torn because what was going on? Well, the country had divided, right? Southern states were going to form the Confederacy, and they were leaving the Union, so to speak. Well, David Lipscomb, he was writing about this, and this was published, of course, in 1913, but he had written about some of these things prior to the Civil War as well. But in 1913, he wrote a thing called On Civil Government. Now, he believed that Christians did not have the right or should not participate in their government, not even to vote. David Lipscomb would have said, nope, we're citizens of that kingdom. We don't have any right participating in this kingdom or in this jurisdiction. Now, I'm going to tell you, folks, I don't really agree with David Lipscomb on that because of Paul's participation in his government. Paul used the government for good purposes, and I think we can too. We have that option. As a matter of fact, you'll notice that Paul participated in the benefits of Roman citizenship. He likely participated in Roman government as well. We see several passages here, and we're not going to go through all of these, but we could participate in civil government. Matter of fact, we see in the New Testament, we see those who are, I just lost my train of thought there for a second. Y'all see it? Anyway, if y'all see it, turn it around, send it back to me. But we see people who were centurions. You remember Cornelius? He was a centurion of the Italian band. Now, centurion, yes, they were military, but they were not necessarily just military. We noticed this morning in Acts chapter 13, where Paul was talking with a man by the name of Sergius Paulus, who was a proconsul. There were those who were in government, who were Christians. So it's not a bad thing for Christians to be involved in government, in the military, in civic things. As a matter of fact, the Bible tells us we're to be the light of the world, the salt of the earth. Well, let's cross that off our list, y'all. And by that, I mean, remind me tomorrow when I won't be here. So there we go. But we are salt, we are light. And if we are not participating in civic things, if we choose not to participate, and by the way, we don't have to participate, but if we choose not to participate, guess what? You're choosing to not let the salt flavor the earth. You're choosing to not let the light shine the truth on the rest of the world. Now, this leads us to a question. Well, what really guides our vote? Because we have this vote, and each of us get one, unless you're somehow special, but I don't think any of us are that special. Generally speaking, we each get one, right? We get one vote. What guides that vote? Is it our faith, our ethics, our values? Should be. We shouldn't be. I remember growing up, there were tales. I don't know that they were true. They might have been true, but I grew up in a dry county where alcohol was not sold by the drink. Alcohol was also not sold by the container. And it was so dry that it was illegal to possess alcohol in the county. Okay, if you were caught with it, you were in trouble. That was the county I grew up in. It's not that way anymore, but it was for a long time, up till about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But nonetheless, that was the county I grew up in. And I remember hearing tales of certain people buying votes by using alcohol. Saying, hey, I'll give you a 6-pack of beer if you'll vote for me. Y'all ever hear of something like that? People selling their votes for a few dollars or for a substance or something like that. Can you believe somebody would do that? Oh yeah, they do it. Those people are not using their vote based upon faith, ethics, and values. They're not concerned about faith, ethics, and values. We as Christians ought to base everything we do in life on our faith, our ethics, and our values. But so many times what we do, though, is we find ourselves basing things on party and tradition and desire. That would be the people who sell their vote for the 6-pack of beer. They sell it for their desire. Sometimes we see the party as being, sometimes we see it like a sports team. And we're like, it's my team. I'm going to be with them no matter what. And it's on both sides, folks. Well, I say both sides. We also have some other parties, the Libertarian, the Green Party, and things like that. But generally, we think of Republican, Democrat, right? That's what we think of, the two parties. But there are multiple parties. But it's not like a sports team. But so many times people treat it like a sports team. Like, I'm going to be with them no matter what. Sometimes people treat it like, or, they think of it like choosing a spouse. They think, oh, I don't want to vote for that one because I don't like them. Okay, I get that. I'm going to tell you, there are very few, if any, well, there are very few. I'll say there have been a few. There have been a few people that I have ever voted for with which I would say I agree with 90% or better of what they believe. And one of those was Sheila Butt for Murray County Mayor. When she was running for Murray County Mayor, I voted for Sheila Butt because she's a member of the Lord's church, faithful member of the Lord's church. I'm like, well, of course I want a faithful member of the Lord's church running things in the county, wouldn't you? Well, it just makes sense. And, I really didn't care what her political affiliation was. I was voting for her because of her values. And it's not like we have to even like who we vote for, although in her case I did. But, oftentimes I vote for people that I don't even like personally. Personally, I might find them objectionable. They're probably not even the kind of people I would say, hey, I want you to come over to my house and let's just hang out, Well, if they're going to do the job that I need them to do, I don't, it's not going to bother me too bad. But I do want to emphasize that voting is not mandatory. Have you ever seen a situation where your choices to vote, you got this one or this one, right? Normally we have two to choose from in most cases. When you look at this one, it's like, oh, I don't like them at all. I can't stand anything they believe, anything that they believe, I don't stand for. Then you look at this one and they're like, oh, I don't like them either. You ever been in that situation? You're like, I don't like either one. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes we might choose not to vote. Now, I think generally speaking, we might want to ask ourselves, well, sometimes we even do this. We ask, well, which party? I don't know that's the right question to be asking because it doesn't matter. The party part doesn't matter. Because what we really need to be concerned about is that our voting declares our values. In Acts chapter 26, verses 9 through 11, you find there that Paul talking about his time having been a persecutor. And he says that when they were voting on who lives and who dies, you know what he did? He said, I was voting to kill them. I was voting to kill Christians. What's that tell you about Paul's values when he was Saul? Tells you a lot about it, doesn't it? It tells us that he didn't care for Christianity at that time. You'll notice that here in Joshua chapter 24, verses 14 and 15, Joshua, he presents to the people, he says, you've got a choice to make. Whether to serve the gods that your father served on the other side of the flood or to serve the Lord. He says, choose you this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, what does he say? I will serve the Lord. And that's what we need to be choosing, is to serve the Lord. Even with our vote, serve the Lord. See, we should always stand for what's right, whether it be on life. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 through 19. You'll notice there that the Bible says the Lord hates those who shed innocent blood. Folks, we need to be concerned about that. What about marriage? The Bible talks about marriage is honorable. But yet, a number of years ago, we had those who were running on the platform of, well, hey, I believe two men ought to be able to get married or two women ought to be able to marry one another. No, that's not what Jesus taught in Matthew 19:9. Jesus taught one man for one woman for one lifetime, right? That's what he taught. We need to stand on that. We need to stand for parental rights. There are those in our country who believe that children belong to the state. And they believe that if children belong to the state, they ought to be able to tell you how you should raise your children and grandchildren. No, that's not what the Bible teaches. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, you find children belong to the parents whom God has given them to. We need to realize there are other issues that might come up, adoption issues, education issues, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, all these things that directly affect our ability to serve our God and to spread the gospel. Those are things we need to be considering. You'll notice in 1 Thessalonians, kind of to bring everything around and put a bow on it, I guess. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 15 and 20 and 21, you'll notice here that Paul says, "See that no one renders evil for evil to anyone, but always pursue what is good both for yourselves," and notice what else he says, "and for all." So when we're looking at casting our vote in whatever race it might be, and we know we've got presidential race coming up, we've got some other races involved in that, but the big one that's getting all the news right now is the presidential, right? But when we're casting our vote, if we choose to do that, we need to make sure we're doing what is good for ourselves and for all. And that's sometimes difficult. That means we might need to dig a little deeper sometimes. We might need to look and see, what do these people really believe? What's their track record? What do they stand on? And that's what we need to be doing as Christians. He says, test all things, hold fast what is good, abstain from every form of evil. As Christians, we don't need to be casting our vote for evil. Matter of fact, we need to try to do what's good for everyone. So as we think about this idea of voting, I want you to keep in mind the blessings that we have in this country, in that we actually have a vote to cast. Many people in the world, they don't even have a vote to give. We do. And that vote is precious. So if you're going to cast a vote, make sure you do it based upon God's word, not based upon the party, not based upon whether you personally like the candidates. I'm going to tell you, a lot of times I don't like either one of them. But I have to just look. Sometimes we say, choose the lesser of two evils. You remember that? Well, sometimes that's the case. Sometimes also we might say, well, I agree with this one, like 75% of their positions. The other 25% I can live with. Sometimes we have to do that and see what's going to be best for everybody. As we think about these things, I want you to remember this, that as Christians, we don't have a vote. Jesus is our King. He's told us everything we need to do so far as the church. He's told us how we come into the church. He's told us what it means to be a part of the church. He tells us what it's going to take to get us saved. And that is, we need to be submitting to Him in everything, whether we like it or we don't. If there's anyone here who has need of the invitation this evening, won't you come while together we stand and while we sing?